Tonight, on the Mysteries of the Sacramental Imagination, we'll be looking at the ritual of penance and how it relates to water, word, and wine. Tonight, we're at American Martyrs Church here in Manhattan Beach, California, where we are going to try to discover the mysteries.
Hey guys, it sounds like they're about to start service. Let's go and take a seat. Because I'm not Catholic, this experience for me was very interesting, just seeing everyone in church and participating in the penance ritual. A lot of the time I didn't know what was going on, but at the same time I felt the whole community being as one. And it was very interesting that at the end everybody was going to ask for forgiveness by the priest.
I really enjoyed the communal penance services that we went to. I believe that it really felt like a community while we were there, even though Shine and I both aren't Catholic. But at the same time, being part of like the call and response that occurred during the church was really, really nice.
Wait.
What is penance?
Stop. Wait, give me like 1 minute. Penance. Isn't it like forgiveness or?
Close enough. Who's your theology professor?
I'm not taking theology right now.
Okay. What are penance services?
Like a type of mass.
Who's your theology professor?
Sorry, what?
Who's your theology professor?
I had Cynthia Bond. Yeah.
That's how you don't know. What are penance services?
What are, sorry?
Penance services.
Pennant?
Penance.
I don't know.
Like penance communal services, so like in the Catholic Church.
I'm not Catholic.
It's where you go to get forgiveness for your sin by confessing, and then the priest forgives you.
So, seeing that only a few students actually know what a penance ritual is, I think I'll just define it for you guys. So, in fact, penance is defined as a sacrament in which a member of the church confesses sins to a priest and is given absolution. Though there are 3 parts, one private, one public, and one combined, to the sacrament, we're only focusing on the combined aspect tonight. Tune in. Oh my gosh, that was such a great experience, but unfortunately, now we have to do some analysis. And we're going to start with Greeley in his book, The Catholic Imagination. So, what Greeley describes as the treasure houses of stories that tells of God's unremittingly merciful love, American Martyrs was actually a really good example of this, as it's a public place of worship for the grounds of Christians to come together and assemble. So, for example, one quote that Greeley uses in his book is which explains God's forgiving love that has no limits. I think this really spoke out to me in my experience of going to this church, because in the whole penance ritual, everyone's asking for forgiveness because of God's merciful love for everyone. A quote that Greeley used that actually spoke out to me, that explained the ritual very well, was on page 168, where he quotes, "They tend to picture God, creation, the world, society, and themselves the way their great artists do, as drenched with grace, that is to say, with God's passionately forgiving love, his salvation," which is a good example of the penance ritual, where God is just forgiving, and no matter what you ask for forgiveness for, he will forgive you in any way.
And I'm going to talk also about Greeley in relation to his chapter on hierarchy. So Greeley has a quote on page 147 that says, "In the Catholic tradition, the priest is more than merely a preacher of the world. He is a sacrament. When he presides over the Eucharist, but in this case, the penance, he stands in the role of Jesus, the high priest, and is touched therefore lightly but permanently by the transcendent. The role demands of him special efforts at goodness despite his ordinary human fragility." And we saw that in during the penance services, the priest became a representation of Christ, and it's in that moment where the penitent, which is like the person who's like trying to ask for forgiveness is in the presence of Christ, and it's only at that moment where the person's sins can be like absolved and forgiven.
Good point. And now we're going to switch gears and talk about Gardini's book, The Spirit of the Liturgy. So what stood out for me was on page 19 how Gardini mentions in the liturgy God is to be honored by the body of the faithful, and the latter is in turn to derive sanctification from this act of worship. So for me, it was pretty obvious that the body of the faithful is the Catholic community, as if you are and if you do stay faithful to the church, you will receive in the latter sanctification from the act of this worship. So if you stay faithful, after you ask for forgiveness, you will be forgiven. This is your part.
All right, so I also chose a quote from page 19, which says, "The liturgical entity consists rather of the united body of the faithful. As such, the church, a body which infinitely outnumbers the mere congregation." And I related it to Sacrosanctum Concilium, where on page 7 or part 26, it says, "Liturgical services are not private functions, but are celebrations of the church, which is the sacrament of unity, namely the holy people united and ordered under their bishops." And I related it to the fact that it's the whole church that's summoned to repentance and forgiveness, and it's also the whole church that's called to reconciliation. It's not just a single individual. So basically, it has a transcendent quality. It's everyone is receiving the same type of forgiveness. But most importantly, I think, is that it transcends, once again, the individual experience.